Chapter 2. The Prophecy is Told. I spotted Chiron and quickly sprinted after him, losing Malcolm. I ran past the volleyball courts and the glittering canoe lake eagerly. I nearly stopped in my tracks when I realized that Luke had been on that boat too. The boat Seaweed Brain went to blow up had Luke on it. No, Kronos. I had to remember that there was no Luke left. But I couldn't help but wonder. Last summer, when Rachel had thrown that hairbrush at him, he had stopped, and his voice had momentarily become, well, Luke's. I stopped myself, thinking like that would only make me feel worse. If I had to fight him, I couldn't afford to think about how I used to like him, and our days on the run with Thalia. I was second into the dining pavilion, and I spotted Percy waiting at the other end. I could feel his eyes on me, so I glanced at him too. We seemed to be about the same height this summer, which was a relief. His dark hair hung just a little bit too low over his eyes. His eyes, which were startling green, like the ocean. I stared into their deepness for a few seconds, lost, until I broke away. I hoped he hadn't noticed. Then, I remembered Luke. I grabbed his arm. "What happened? Is Luke—" "The ship blew up," he said. "He wasn't destroyed. I don't know where—" "Where's Charlie?" I glanced behind me and felt deep guilt. There was Selena, who had just burst through the crowd. Beckendorf. He wasn't here. How could I not realize that? With just one look at Percy, I could tell. He was gone. My mouth went dry, and I stared at Selena's face as she realized the truth. "Selena," Chiron started, his voice soft. "My dear, let's talk about this at the big house." "No," she muttered. "No. No!" She began to cry, and I even shed a tear of my own. I had known Beckendorf for so long. He had kept a lot of this camp together. Without him, it felt like the camp wasn't whole anymore. Clarice, the bully of the camp, daughter of Ares, grabbed Selena's shoulder. "Come on, girl. Let's go to the big house. I'll make you some hot chocolate." Even though she was normally tough and hated Aphrodite, since Selena had given her tips on her boyfriend last summer, they had become close friends. Everyone turned and left the pavilion, some crying with their heads in their hands. I realized how lucky I was that Seaweed Brain wasn't gone. Since I had almost lost him last summer, I knew I would be a complete mess for a long time. I wiped a tear from my cheek. "I'm glad you're not dead, Seaweed Brain." "Thanks," he replied. "Me too." Chiron put a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sure you did everything you could, Percy. Will you tell us what happened?" Percy told us about a dream he had had of the Titans, and how Beckendorf and him had almost escaped from the Princess Andromeda. He had a guilty ring to his voice as he told us this. From knowing him so well, I could just tell that he blamed himself for Beckendorf's death. Seaweed Brain blamed himself for everything. Then he told us about a visit he had taken at Poseidon's underwater castle, and the damage happening to it. Apparently, there was also a spy at camp, which I had learned right after our trip to the Sea of Monsters, but had sort of forgotten about it. It seemed to me like he was keeping something secret, but I decided not to bug him about it. After all, I was keeping secrets too. Chiron began, "We must call a war council immediately, to discuss this spy and other matters." "Poseidon mentioned another threat," Percy moaned, scanning the valley. "Something even bigger than the Princess Andromeda. I thought it might be the challenge the Titan had mentioned in my dream." I exchanged looks with Chiron, and he seemed to say, "It's time." I had dreaded showing Percy the prophecy since I'd found out he was the son of Poseidon. I had read it at a young age, and it still gave me nightmares. I felt Percy's eyes on me. He knew I was hiding something, and he wanted answers. I avoided his green glare. "I've dreaded this day. Very well. Annabeth." I flinched when Chiron said my name. "We will show Percy the truth. All of it. Let's go to the attic." We were up in the attic, and I was nervous, for Percy's sake. I remembered reading this when I had been 7, and well, I still have nightmares sometimes. I studied Percy, and he picked up a curved sword from the battle last summer. You remember Briareus throwing those boulders? Percy asked, clearly trying to lighten the mood. I gave him a grudging smile for that, and replied, And Grover causing a panic? I almost laughed aloud at the memory, but the expression on Percy's face stopped me. I froze, and we locked eyes. I knew what he was thinking. He was thinking about the kiss. Our kiss last summer when I had thought he was going to die. I flinched at remembering his cry of pain, before the water and lava mixed and enveloped me in darkness. I had never quite figured out what Percy had thought of the kiss. I remember quite clearly the dreamy smile he'd displayed after the kiss, when I'd put my invisibility cap on already, and he had thought I was gone. I didn't want to hear what he thought about it right now, though. I wasn't sure I was ready. We needed to concentrate on the war. That was most important. Prophecy, I said, after clearing my throat and avoiding Percy's gaze. Right, he replied, putting the sword down. Prophecy. We walked over to the window where the Oracle of Delphi sat, a shriveled-up mummy who was wearing a tie-dye dress and a bunch of hippie jewelry. I thought about how we used to have to get a quest from this mummy to leave camp. All those years I had waited, and now, because of the war, demigods left all the time on quests. It was the only way if we were going to stop Kronos. Percy whispered, which broke my train of thought. I never understood this. What? I asked, confused. Why, it's a mummy. Percy, she didn't used to be a mummy. For thousands of years, the spirit of the Oracle lived inside a beautiful maiden. The spirit would be passed on from generation to generation. Chiron told me she was like that 50 years ago. I pointed at the frail mummy. But she was the last. What happened? I almost told him, but with basically the weight of the world on his shoulders, I figured it might be better if he had one less thing to worry about. Let's just do our job and get out of here, I told him. So what now? He asked me. I approached the mummy and held my palms out. O Oracle, the time is at hand. I ask for the great prophecy. I saw Percy brace himself from the corner of my eye and almost laughed, until I remembered the situation. I unclasped one of the Oracle's necklaces. I turned back to Percy holding a pouch. I pulled from it a small scroll. Percy's eyes widened. No way, he said. You mean all these years I've been asking about this stupid prophecy and it's been right there around her neck? The time wasn't right, I told him. Believe me, Percy. I read this when I was 10 years old and I still have nightmares about it. Great. Can I read it now? He sounded like he just wanted to get it over with. Downstairs at the War Council, I explained. Not in front of, you know. I wasn't sure if he would catch on. He was a seaweed brain after all. But he glanced nervously at the Oracle and nodded his head. We didn't say another word until we reached the War Council. Or the rec room. It had sort of become a tradition that we held war councils there. I never knew why. But my attention was more drawn to a shouting match. It was between Clarice and MCLEOD, the head counselor for Apollo. Gods, why didn't they just get over this stupid chariot already? Didn't they realize we had more important things to focus on? I had to admit, though, the arguing was quite funny. Well, because MCLEOD was a lot shorter than Clarice, and had to stand on his toes in order to get in her face. He yelled something about it being their loot and kissing his quiver. I wasn't paying attention, though. My focus was on Percy, as usual. He was trying not to laugh, which I found cute. I mean, never mind. I said what I said. I won't try to deny it. I know I like him, and yet, sometimes I still try to deny my feelings. Nothing makes sense anymore. After a minute, Percy seemed to remember what was going on, and yelled, "Stop it!" I couldn't help but notice that his bangs flung over his eyes, and his... Focus, Annabeth. I silently cursed myself. I saw Selena crying in the corner of the room, and felt remorse. It really hit me now. Beckendorf was gone. I realized that everyone had been arguing, and when I came back to reality, I heard Clarice say, or rather shout, "All of you can fight this war without Ares. Until I get satisfaction, no one in my cabin is lifting a finger to help. Have fun dying!" And with that, she stormed out of the room, and many of us questioned her. And I agreed. There were things way more important right now, and to let her pride get in the way? Wait, that was my fatal flaw. Pride. But I was controlling it, I thought. Maybe not well enough, the other half thought. I was having a war with myself. Great. I realized that Percy was looking at me with question. He was probably wondering what they were bickering about. I'll tell you later, I mouthed to him. Now, Chiron continued, if you please, counselors, Percy has brought something I think you should hear. Percy, the great prophecy. I handed Percy the paper. It crinkled with my touch. He uncurled it and began to read slowly. A half-blood born of the eldest dogs. Curse his dyslexia. And curse mine too while I'm at it. Percy? I interrupted. That's gods, not dogs. Oh, right, he said, sounding scared. His face was paler than I'd ever seen it before. A half-blood born of the eldest gods shall reach 16 against all odds. I watched his face turn horrified as he glanced at the next lines. He gulped. I couldn't help but feel really, really sorry for him. He continued, and see the world in endless sleep. The hero's soul cursed blade shall reap. His eyes widened, realization dawning on him. I felt like an awful friend, and remorse was biting at me. I had never told him, and here we were a week before, and he learned this. I could never love him. Yet I already did. I needed him to know how I felt before I dared to say it, died. He would die. I could barely even think the thought without feeling like the world was ending. And yet, it was. Percy, Chiron urged, read the rest. A single choice shall end his days. Olympus to pursue. Preserve? I corrected him gently. It means to save. I know what it means, he grumbled under his breath. Was I really treating him like he was that stupid? Olympus to preserve or raise. He finished, and an eerie silence filled the room. No one dared to speak. I could tell everyone was in deep thought. This thought was shattered by none other than Connor Stoll. Raise is good, isn't it? Not raise, Selena corrected him softly, obviously still cracked from Beckendorf's death. R-A-Z-E means destroy. Obliterate? I recited a word from the thesaurus. Annihilate. Turn to rubble. Maybe saying that hadn't been a very good idea because Percy said, sounding more down than I'd ever heard him speak, Got it. Thanks. Everyone was looking at him with obvious concern. Chiron started to try to comfort Percy. You see now, Percy, why we thought it was best not to tell you the whole prophecy. You've had enough on your shoulders. Without realizing I was going to die in the end anyway? Percy said. Yeah, I get it. Chiron looked at Percy as he realized reassurance wasn't what he needed. But I disagreed. And plus, I knew that I needed reassurance myself. Percy, I cut in, you know prophecies always have double meanings. It might not literally mean you die. Sure, Percy responded grimly. A single choice shall end his days. That has tons of meaning, right? I couldn't help but think all of this over. There was no more years of pretending the future was a long way off. The prophecy was now, and Percy would probably die. He didn't deserve it. I hate to think this way, but I think that he deserved to live, probably more than anyone else at camp. He was just such a sweet guy. He always put others first, blamed himself for others' doings, and he was extremely loyal. In all honesty, sometimes I think he's too down on himself. He is. I don't know if he even realizes just how amazing he is. He seems to think of himself as the underdog. It's like he only does things to get them done, but never stops to realize just how amazing he is. Gods, I'm really falling for him hard. I came out of my daydream session when Percy furiously said, "No!" It startled me to hear him so angry. The only other time I ever heard him speak that way is to monsters who are going to hurt his friends. "I don't need time. If I die, I die. I can't worry about that, right?" I felt my hands shaking. I could feel Percy's gaze on me, but I didn't dare look at him. "Let's move on," Percy said more gently. "We've got other problems. We've got a spy." When Percy wasn't looking at me anymore, I looked at him. I just couldn't take the way he looked. Depressed. The only cute part was that his eyebrows scrunched up. It was something he did when he was worried. Cute. The others kept talking, but once again, I just couldn't pay attention to anyone but Percy. At least until Selena started to cry, and I comforted her. Suddenly, Selena jumped up. "Stop!" She banged the table and her hot chocolate spilled. "Charlie's dead and you're all arguing like little kids!" She began heartbroken sobbing. I watched a hot chocolate river form and dribble slowly off the edge of the table. I couldn't help but feel ashamed. I looked at Chiron. It was time to show Percy the bigger threat. "Percy," Chiron said, "we didn't want to tell you until you returned to camp. You needed a break with your mortal friends." I blushed. When I got the strength to glare at Percy, a string of emotions passed his face. First, he looked happy, then sad, then guilty, and lastly, angry. Gods, what was going on in that boy's head? I hated Rachel. That's what everyone thought, right? Wrong. In fact, I envied her. She got to see the other side of Percy, the normal one, when he was doing his homework or just hanging out. Sure, though, I did feel a bit jealous of Rachel. She was pretty, and I felt like, after all those years of me trying to submit my feelings to Percy, she interrupted. When I glanced up again, everyone was looking at an image. Typhon, our biggest threat. "It's him," Percy said. "Typhon." I watched realization slap him in the face. He was realizing just how hopeless this all was. Then Chiron showed us what was happening today. The mortals thought it was a freak storm. Once again, I couldn't help but marvel at the power that the mist held. Then, I saw the gods, battling a useless war. I could tell they were weakening. "Are those the gods?" Percy asked. "Duh, seaweed brain," I wanted to say, but I restrained myself. "Yes, Percy," Chiron said. "They have been fighting him for days now, trying to slow him down. But Typhon is marching forward toward New York. Towards Olympus." I gulped. "How long until he gets here?" Percy asked, a moment before I was going to. "Until the gods can stop him? Perhaps 5 days. Most of the Olympians are there, except your father, who has a war of his own to fight." "But then who's guarding Olympus?" I watched Connor Stoll shake his head. "If Typhon gets to New York, it won't matter who's guarding Olympus." It had to be a trick, I thought, gears turning in my mind. Something else was going to happen. An attack on Olympus, perhaps. "It's a trick," Percy interrupted, and seemed to repeat my thought. "We have to warn the gods. Something else is going to happen." "Something worse than Typhon? I hope not," Chiron said sadly. "We have to defend Olympus," Percy insisted. "Kronos has another attack planned." "He did," Travis said, "but you sunk his ship." I glanced at Percy, and could tell he was thinking the same thing I was. What if the Princess Andromeda was a ploy? What if Kronos had let us blow up the ship? Then, maybe we would lower our guard. I didn't want to say that in front of Selena. "Maybe you're right," Percy said, sounding not the least bit hopeful. It was silent for a while. It was really sinking in. This was happening. Percy would die. Olympus might be destroyed. Heck, everything might be destroyed. "Well," Chiron said, "I think that's enough for one night." "That's an understatement," I heard Percy mutter. I couldn't help but feel sorry for him, yet again. But I had to remember. He wasn't the only one at risk. I could die too. Anyone could die. Everyone left, feeling hopeless.